Please stand. In honor of our kupuna, we're going to honor the four pinnacles, starting with south, east, west, north. Kanikapu akau. Kanikapu kahiki. Kanikapu akau. Kanikapu ohohana. Kanikapu hana. E nā kino e kalani, e malu e hoi, e ho ulu mai ana o laka, e kunu makau, e mako, e mako, e mako e. No ana ki a kua ka nā helele, I ai la ia ki ki o wo, ka ua kōko. E nā kino e kalani, e malu e hoi, e ho ulu mai ana o laka. E kunu makau, e mako, e mako, e mako e. Loa e kupuna, loa e makua, aloha e opio. Aloha e keki, aloha e aloha.
Mahalo Kumo Brad for that beautiful ole. My name is Melissa Miyashiro, and I'm the Executive Director at Blue Planet Foundation. We're a small nonprofit based in downtown Honolulu, and we keep locally driven policy change at the heart of what we do, believing that it can activate equitable solutions at the pace and scale needed to meet the challenge of the climate crisis. Thank you all for joining us, and mahalo to our sponsor, Elemental Accelerator, media partner KHON2 News, and Vai Collective for allowing us to host today's forum in this beautiful space. Today's conversation is an important one. The impacts of climate change are more prevalent than ever before, and we are already seeing the effects here in the islands. Sea level rise, wildfires, and severe storms have damaged our communities, our food supply, and our local economy. The science is clear that unless we cut our emissions in half by 2030, these impacts will only get worse. With only 8 years to go to that date, the leaders we elect today in this year, in this election cycle, will be critical to leading our state's path to a cleaner and more resilient future. Rooted in a sense of community, Hawaii is the perfect place to show the world what's possible for equitable climate solutions. Hawaii has already made impressive progress towards decarbonization, including a suite of first-in-the-nation policy goals. Hawaii was the first state in the country to adopt a 100% renewable energy requirement for electricity by 2045. Hawaii was the first state to commit to the Paris Climate Agreement objectives after the Trump administration announced its intention to pull out of the agreement. And Hawaii also pledged to achieve a carbon negative economy by 2045, with an interim goal to reach 50% emissions reduction of 2005 levels by 2030. So with these bold policy goals in place, we're moving towards implementation. And that's why at Blue Planet, we're seeking to support our policymakers with resources and tools to keep the climate at the forefront of their agendas. We're also tracking our progress to identify opportunities for accelerating that progress. And we also want to build brave and creative coalitions to drive impact to get the job done. That is why we are so excited to work with the next governor and lieutenant governor of Hawaii, as the coming years are critical to our state's success regarding climate change. This is a daunting task, especially with competing crises taking place throughout our islands, such as homelessness, cost of living, and public health, which are further intensified by the impacts of climate change. To better help us understand the crisis at hand, I'd like to introduce Dr. Chip Fletcher. Chip is the interim dean of the School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He's a professor and former chair of the Department of Earth Sciences and the Honolulu Climate Change Commission. His research focuses on modeling the impacts of sea level rise in Hawaii. Please welcome Dr. Chip Fletcher.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. So, as we know, Earth has warmed 1.3 degrees Celsius, or 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit. This may not seem like much, but Earth is very sensitive to small changes in heat. The human body is also very sensitive to small changes in heat. Global warming is equivalent to running a low-grade fever of about 100.8 degrees Fahrenheit. And global warming is increasing. In fact, it's currently on track to warm over 3 degrees Celsius or reach a high-grade fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit sometime before the end of the century. However, the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the global average. In other words, it's the equivalent of a body temperature of 108 degrees Fahrenheit. This is called Arctic amplification, and it is shifting the jet stream to the north, bringing equatorial weather onto the Northern Hemisphere continents, North America, Europe, China. Right now, as we speak, Flint, Michigan is experiencing the weather of Memphis, Tennessee, and Memphis is experiencing the weather of Cuba. Beijing, Shanghai, Paris, London, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago are all experiencing record-high humid heat. And Southern California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico are undergoing a 1,200-year megadrought, equivalent to the deserts of central Mexico. Last year saw a 49% drop in hydropower in Southern California. And today, 400,000 acres of ag land are going unfarmed in Southern California and the Southwest states because of lack of water. Compared to 50 years ago, large fires on the continent are 5 times more frequent and 10 times larger. Hawaii relies on the continent for food, manufactured goods, fuel, and tourism. But every summer, the continent is on fire, and every summer, the heat is worse. It may not be obvious yet, but our continental lifelines are at risk. In my mind, a strong resilience plan for Hawaii must address the 4 pillars of our community through the lens of what the IPCC calls climate resilient development, which combines adaptation and mitigation in a single approach, emphasizing equity, sustainability, and resilience. People are our first pillar, and our social instabilities are profound. 1/3 of households in Hawaii are unable to afford the basics of housing, childcare, food, transportation, healthcare, and technology. Another 9% live below the poverty line. These are instabilities that need repair before the shocks and stresses of climate change amplify our divisions to the point of irreversibility. Energy is the second pillar. The state's energy needs consist of electricity and fuels, both of which depend on external sources of crude oil. Decreasing our dependence on foreign oil is an important step in building sustainability in the electricity sector. However, developing future sources of renewable energy cannot be at the expense of local, rural communities and natural environments. Although there has been strong progress in Hawaii's energy pillar, instabilities remain in the form of lack of electricity redundancy, growing demands on renewable energy by electricity and transportation sectors, lack of aviation and shipping fuel autonomy, and local community distrust in renewable energy projects. Our third pillar is our economy. Historically, the delivery of critical goods and services by shipping and aviation has been reliable. However, COVID taught us in March 2020 that this can change overnight. Russian aggression in the Ukraine continues to exacerbate supply line disruptions started during the pandemic. As continental communities experience growing climate stresses, they have less capacity to build and grow the things that we need in Hawaii. A major component of climate resilient development is to accelerate production of locally grown food, incentivize local manufacturing and small businesses to make the essentials that we require, and to rapidly decrease our addiction to shipping and aviation. The fourth pillar is community resilience. Climate change is going to throw more hardships at Hawaii, expanding drought, sea level rise, hurricanes, declining rainfall, increased flooding, wildfires, and above all, heat. To be resilient, we need to build these hazards into new community designs. I encourage our candidates for elected office to recognize that the best climate change plan will emphasize climate resilient development in healing our community, becoming energy independent, creating a thriving and sustainable and independent economy, and building resilient communities. And now let's hear from the candidates. I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's forum, Gina Mangieri from KHON2 News. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Fletcher, for that reality check. Thank you. Aloha and mahalo for joining us for the Climate and Clean Energy Forum here at Kawaiwai, the collective. The candidates will have a series of questions and will each have 90 seconds for their answers. I'm going to introduce them now. Let's welcome our candidates for Lieutenant Governor. First, Keith Amemiya is a community and business leader who knows how to bring people together. He transformed youth sports in Hawaii, and when state budget cuts threatened to end junior varsity athletics, he led the Save Our Sports campaign, raising more than $1.5 million in just 3 months to keep youth sports alive. Welcome. Next, Ikaika Anderson is a former Honolulu City Council chair, a lifelong resident of Windward, Oahu, and he has served the people of Hawaii for over 22 years. During his 11-year tenure on the Honolulu City Council, he built a reputation as a consensus-building public servant who produces results and listens to the people that he represents. And Representative Sylvia Luke has been in politics for the past 24 years, most recently as chair of the House Finance Committee. Although she's a representative of Oahu, she has spent much of her time as a state legislator traveling to other counties across the state, working on important solutions to Hawaii's most pressing issues. Welcome to you all. Have a seat. Well, today's discussion will focus on what steps these folks would take as Lieutenant Governor to create a clean and resilient future for our islands. So let's get started with our first question. Aloha United Way's Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed Report, or ALICE report, suggests that nearly half of Hawaii residents cannot afford basic necessities and what they need to remain stable and self-sufficient. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do to ensure that clean energy and sustainable mobility solutions are there to benefit everyone in Hawaii. Keith, you're first.
Thank you, Gina. Well, first and foremost, we need better, stronger, more decisive leadership, and that starts at the Capitol. Right now, our legislators are too beholden to special interest groups that dictate our decisions, and they are not acting in the best interests of the community at large. Let's start with term limits, banning fundraising during the legislative session, eliminating financial conflicts of interest, and requiring legislators to comply with sunshine laws. Secondly, we need to look at the fact that other than the island of Kauai, we are beholden to a monopolistic utility company, Hawaiian Electric. Although they've been a partner and have made strides in getting us to clean energy, they can and still must do a lot more. Let's look at the fact that Hawaiian Electric's owned by outside institutional investors, multi-billion-dollar companies whose first and foremost priority is to make a profit for themselves. The ratepayers, all of us here in Hawaii, come in second. So let's look at other models. Let's look at Kauai Island Utility Cooperative. Let's look at SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility District. Their goal is to reach 100% clean energy by the year 2030. Let's strive higher. Let's be like SMUD. Third, let's get more federal dollars that's left on the table every year. We leave billions of dollars in federal funding. Let's make sure we use that money to become 100% cleaner energy much more before 2045. Thank you.
And Ikaika.
Gina, thank you very much for the question. I'd like to thank Blue Planet for putting this event on. Also see that we have some folks from Elemental Accelerator and other experts in the room here with us on climate change. As the chair of the Honolulu City Council, my office helped to implement the funding of the Office of Climate Change and Resiliency that was led by then Climate Resiliency Officer Josh Stanbro, who we have here with us. And there were many who urged me as council chair not to fund the office because some felt that we had more pressing needs. Our team funded the office anyway because we feel that climate change is an extremely important issue. We feel the same way today. Under Director Stanbro's leadership, the Office of Climate Resiliency was able to apply for and successfully receive many federal grant dollars. As Lieutenant Governor, I would reach to people like Director Stanbro, Elemental Accelerator, and looking for their expertise to help us to bring these initiatives together, much like we did with the Honolulu City Council in putting together the Oahu Resiliency Plan. We also need to rely on the other experts who are here with us, like Dr. Fletcher, who has talked for years about revamping our state policies and even our county policies about seawalls. I know it's a tough policy call to make, but we can't allow for unpermitted seawalls to be hardened, to even be rebuilt. As government, we need to do better. As Lieutenant Governor, I will work with the experts in those fields to bring in additional federal grant dollars to help all of our people and also to revamp our policies. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sylvia.
Thank you. Thank you. This is what separates me from the other candidates. I've been in the legislature working on major policies, working on clean energy initiatives. So I'm going to answer the question. The question was, what can we do to low-income and moderate-income families who struggle with transportation costs? Alice report stated that transportation was one of the biggest cost drivers for individuals. Individuals living in the rural areas, they don't have the type of access like individuals living in the urban areas. For instance, they don't have bike lanes. If we want to move to different alternative transportation, for one of the highest cost drivers for these individuals, we have to provide better infrastructure. Better infrastructure means bike lanes, better infrastructure means sidewalk. It's livable areas where you work and live in the communities that you are living and thrive. So it is really about building jobs in the communities, building preschools in the communities, taking away some of the obstacles that force people to drive places. So it's really about building communities. Aloha.
All right. The pace at which Hawaii can advance its renewable energy agenda is largely dependent on how the electric utility and developers engage with the communities that host renewable energy projects, such as that in Kahuku has shown that failing to address a community's needs and concerns can fuel community-wide opposition. Hawaiian Electric is proposing that developers offer a community benefits package for communities affected by renewable energy projects, including up to $200,000 for community-identified needs. Do you support this, and what specific actions would you take to improve community engagement and support for renewable energy? Sylvia, you can answer that first.
Thank you. What happened in Kahuku was an unfortunate situation. The community was not engaged, and the $200,000, which is being proposed by HECO, cannot replace community engagement. What current policy at the PUC, which is the Public Utilities Commission, requires that when a community is hosting renewable energy project, all the ratepayers, including all of Oahu, has to benefit. That is wrong. If a community, especially in the rural areas and in areas that are impacted, if they're hosting renewable energy project, then what is required from the state is that we give back to that community first, lower their energy bills, lower their energy costs, so that they truly see the community benefit. $200,000 offer cannot buy public engagement, and we need to engage all the time, just as what Chip and others have talked about. Climate change is not something that we should talk about just when it's convenient or lip service. We have to talk about it all the time for us to educate the entire community about climate crisis, about why this is a kuleana for everybody, that we have to take responsibility. Then we can avoid things like Kahuku farms, or we can avoid things anytime there's a solar farm that is being built in especially rural communities. Again, thank you.
Thank you. Keith, you can go next.
This is just yet another classic example of our elected officials and other decision makers being tone deaf to the needs of the community and what's best for the general public at large. I've been to Kahuku, and I suggest anyone who hasn't, go out there. Go look at the wind farms or the solar mills or whatever you call them. They're monolithic, they're massive, they're unsightly, they're in the middle of neighborhoods, they're near schools. I guarantee you, you would never find a wind farm in Kailua, Kahala, or Hawaii Kai. It's unfair to Kahuku to have to bear the brunt of having these large, gigantic windmills in the middle of their neighborhoods. It's another example of decision makers telling the community what their decision is before the community had the opportunity to weigh in and express their concerns. In terms of the $200,000 that was offered to the community, that's far too little. Let's look at partnerships with the community. Let's have the community get an equity stake in the project, perhaps, so that they are true partners. Let's also look at the fact or possibility for the community to get a reduction in their utility payments. All in all, that's just yet another example of elected officials and decision makers and lobbyists making decisions that are not in the best interest of the public.
I would actually propose as a former county elected official that we involve our county elected officials in the public hearing process, because those elected officials are closest to the people, particularly on the neighbor islands. Nothing against our state lawmakers, but our state lawmakers on the neighbor islands spend up to 4 months a year here on Oahu. Our county council members are home all day, every day amongst the people that they represent. I have built not just relationships, but actual friendships with many current and former county elected officials across this state. I would reach to them to talk to their communities in an effort to understand their communities best, and also to understand where in their respective communities that they would be comfortable hosting solar farms, windmills, if anywhere. That's really the best place to start the hearing process. As far as the $200,000 benefits, the city and county of Honolulu tried that on the Leeward Coast in response to providing the Leeward Coast communities with a benefits package in exchange for hosting the landfill. Nice thought, nice gesture, simply wasn't enough. I would propose that we look at real benefits for these folks who are going to be hosting these types of energy producing equipment. of electricity rates either being prorated or possibly being forgiven in some communities. Those are the discussions I think that we need to start with. But I would want to engage my former colleagues at the county council levels to ensure that we're reaching out to every single community in the most effective way possible.
Thank you. A Hawaii Climate Commission sea level rise report estimates at least $19 billion in damages from expected sea level rise alone within today's students' lifetimes. Imagine that. The amount of potential human suffering, well, that defies quantification. As Lieutenant Governor, what top 2 actions would you advocate for to rapidly reduce Hawaii's contributions to climate change through fossil fuel use and greenhouse gas emissions from all sources in a time frame that achieves the state's commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement? Ikaika.
As Lieutenant Governor, I would work with the governor on formulating policies to work on initiatives such as this one. Extremely concerned with greenhouse emissions. The city and county of Honolulu actually took initiative, if everybody recalls, in being one of the first counties in the state, if not the first, to actually file a lawsuit against the fossil fuel industry to help show our commitment to holding the fossil fuel industry accountable. That was huge in the city and county of Honolulu. The city council, as well as the mayor's office, we also talked to neighbor island counties about doing the same. I would look to further that as well, to try to get some additional monies. We equated that action to suing the tobacco companies, which people said was a waste of time when that first happened, but turned out to be very lucrative for government. So as Lieutenant Governor, I would want to work with the next governor on initiatives like that to see exactly what we could do to be able to get some of those dollars here into the state and be able to tackle some of those issues on climate change. But I think that's a great place to start in holding the fossil fuel industry accountable, to see what we can do to possibly make some headway with those lawsuits and not make them turn out into just worthless words.
Thank you. Sylvia.
Thank you. There are 2 things we can do quickly. The first one is the Congress is about to pass a law which reinstates the EV rebates. EV credits, but this time it is means tested so that it is really geared towards middle and low income families. A lot of times in the past, the criticism for even EV rebates and PVs have been that the wealthier communities were able to take advantage, but the low-income and middle-income families couldn't take advantage. So this Congress is set to really really allocate it for middle and low-income families. The state can match that. If we were to provide a matching fund for purchase of EVs, it will substantially increase the number of EVs in Hawaii. The other thing is the part of the bill allows for a $4,000 rebate for used EVs, which, excuse me, which is a new concept because used EVs will, theoretically will be cheaper than new ones. Excuse me. So again, the state could also provide a matching fund. The second thing is EV charging stations. In as much as the state is a leader in renewable energies, the state ranks bottom when it comes to accessibility of EV charging station. So that's why we set aside a portion of our barrel tax to expand the access of EV charging stations. So we will continue to make strides in making sure that EV charging stations are accessible throughout the state.
Thank you. And Keith.
Well, I know I'm preaching to the choir to this audience here, but we're in a crisis. We're in literally an existential threat. We need to address climate change much, much faster. We owe it to not only ourselves, but especially our younger generations. In terms of reducing climate change issues or factors here in Hawaii, let's first start with getting more vehicles off the road, getting as many vehicles off the road. What remaining vehicles we have, let's electrify those vehicles, whether it's for personal use or for public transportation. Let's also look at building rail. Hopefully it's built before we're all dead and bankrupt. Let's use that. It's a viable means of transportation in many other major cities, and let's hope we see the day that rail is finally completed. Let's also create more walkable, bikeable, if that's a word, cities and areas across our state. And again, bottom line, let's get more fossil fuel-based vehicles off the road. Secondly, let's look at seawater air conditioning. We have Mackay Engineering, one of the world's leaders in seawater air conditioning. Both our hotels and our commercial office buildings are some of the highest users of electricity because of their use of air conditioning in Waikiki and in downtown Honolulu in particular. Let's move full speed ahead. Let's facilitate seawater air conditioning and apply it to those areas and eventually to other areas like shopping malls and other office buildings across our state. Thank you.
Well, tourism has played a substantial role in Hawaii's economy for well over half of a century. What role does the visitor industry play in helping the state achieve its climate and clean energy goals? And what changes are needed? Keith.
Well, some of the areas I just mentioned in the previous answer, but let's also look at reducing the number of tourists. You reduce the number of tourists, you reduce the number or amount of electricity usage and other energy usage across our state. We need to provide a better model. The Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement has been selected to be the marketing and communications arm of the Hawaii Tourism Agency. They have promoted regenerative tourism, Kama'aina-based tourism. I support that. Let's move towards a tourism or a tourist that is more sensitive to the needs of our state, that is more collaborative and a partner in making Hawaii the best that it can be. And that's the way I would approach tourism and how we can benefit our concerns with respect to climate change.
Thank you. Sylvia.
Thank you. There are two things that are vital. Aviation continues to be the #1 contributor for carbon footprint. There's no doubt, aviation. What does that mean? We need to make sure that we work towards alternative or sustainable aviation fuel. United Airlines is already discussing having waste to energy for their fuel as opposed to being reliant on fossil fuels. We have to work with our federal partners and we have to be a leader in the nation to call for mandated sustainable aviation fuel. That's the #1 thing that we must do. The second thing is I have been supporter of green fees. What does that mean? Setting aside even a portion of the TAT or setting a new fee to assess every tourist who come on our land and make sure that they pay a portion to pay for climate crisis. So what does that mean? It's to provide funding for watershed protection. It's to provide funding for coral reef regeneration. Right now, we continue to have coral bleaching around the state because of the rising temperature in our seas. And we have provided funding to mitigate that, but that's not enough. And tourism industry must play a part to address climate change. Two things we must do right away.
Thank you. And Ikaika.
First, I'd propose that the state change the way that it markets Hawaii. Our marketing right now is focused on quantity of visitor versus quality of visitor, meaning how many heads can we put on beds in our hotels. That focus, to me, is just absolutely wrong. I'd like to work with HTA as well as the new contractor that's going to be working on mainland visitor marketing, the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, towards a more cultural focused and cultural based process of welcoming our visitors. I also support, as the City and County of Honolulu has done, implementing fees to use some of our most popular local places. They shouldn't be attractions, but oftentimes they're looked at as attractions. When you bring budget travelers here, what do they, by and large, utilize? Our trails, our beaches, and our city parks, and our state parks. Why? Because it's free to access most of them. That shouldn't happen. I'm absolutely willing to go the way the city did with Hanauma Bay and start to charge a fee so that we can recoup some of these monies. I could not support utilizing any of the transient accommodations tax. I think the counties have already been robbed enough from the transient accommodations tax to be able to assist any more services. But I do believe that it would be great to implement fees, such as some are talking about, that the City and County of Honolulu has done, and also switching to a more cultural-based process and focus on how we're going to be welcoming visitors here. If we lower the number of visitors, we lower their carbon footprint and their impact here in Hawaii.
Thank you. All right, one final question for today. Hawaii imports more than 85% of its food, and that leaves residents more susceptible to food insecurity rising global food prices, and also other factors. There's also a steep carbon footprint associated with the transport of all of those goods to the islands. As Lieutenant Governor, how would you help develop a more resilient and productive local food system that supports families and farmers? Sylvia.
Thank you. We have to support farmers and ranchers. That means long-term leases for land, long-term leases for water, because water accessibility and land accessibility is critical to making sure that farmers and ranchers succeed. The other thing is a lot of times farmers, they know how to farm, but they may not be really good at the business side. So that's why we need to support farm hubs. This year and years past, I supported funding for farm hubs. We have a really successful farm hub in right on the leeward side, Kaumana. And that is a successful model where they pool different farm products from different farmers, and they become the go-between to pool all these, whether it's citruses or whether it's goods, to sell to restaurants, to sell to schools, to sell to farmers market. And we need more farmers to take that business portion out of the farming industries, because you want to encourage farmers to do what they can do best, which is farming. The other thing is we also need to make sure that, in addition to farm hubs, we have to have a robust farm-to-school program. This is providing not just the supply side, but the demand side. And if we can have kids eat healthy, kids enjoy the food and see the food that they're growing, this will really help the future generation in entering the farming industry as well.
Thank you. Ikaika.
As a former county elected official, our team is very well versed in the core services that county governments provide that people rely on to live their everyday lives. Police, fire, ambulance, lifeguards, your public safety functions, as well as your refuse, your recyclables, your sanitation services. As Lieutenant Governor, I'm hopeful that Governor Cayetano, Governor Kahele, or Governor Green would allow my team as Lieutenant Governor to implement treating agriculture for the first time as a core service. And what I mean by treating agriculture as a core service, we would look for subsidies to be able to provide our farmers in getting their crops from the farm to harvest. Oftentimes that involves shipping crops to be harvested, bringing them back to Hawaii, trucking them again to our stores. In exchange for those credits, the farmer would have to agree, and we'd put this into statute, to offer lower prices to the consumer, because all of us as taxpayers would be subsidizing those credits. So actually treating agriculture as a core service is a cornerstone of our public policy team's approach in the Lieutenant Governor's office. Furthermore, we would also propose that in working with the next governor, we would have to work really, really, really hard to ensure that we'd be able to make these tax breaks work, and that they would be able to be affordable not only to the farmer but also to the state in providing the tax credits. But I think that's something we'd be able to do, including creating longer-term leases on state ag lands.
Thank you. And Keith.
Like affordable housing, like homelessness, like climate change, for decades we've talked about the need to diversify our economy, to support agriculture, and to end our reliance on imported food. Well, it's time to finally walk the walk. There's a saying that to see or to find out about a legislator's priorities, look at their budget. Currently, the Department of Agriculture only gets 0.4% of the state's entire budget. It's time to allocate more resources to the Department of Agriculture so that we can diversify our economy, so that we can end our reliance on imported food. We need to also look at providing subsidies to the agriculture industry, at least in the short run. We did that with sugar. We provided state subsidies. We also got subsidies from the federal government. It's essential that we provide government subsidies so that we can get our agricultural programs kick-started throughout our state. And finally, I mentioned this in a prior answer, we need to stop leaving billions of dollars of federal money on the table. Let's get resources dedicated to make sure that we collect every penny that we're entitled to from the federal government. Lieutenant Governor Schatz, when he was a lieutenant governor, created a task force totally dedicated to ensuring that we capture all of the federal money that we're entitled to. Let's resume that practice and not leave money on the table.
Thank you. And mahalo to you all. That brings us to the end of our time with these candidates for Lieutenant Governor. Let's give them a round of applause. And with that, we'll take just a moment to transition into our Governor Forum. I can take your microphones if you wish. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Well, with the climate crisis more prevalent than ever, the transition to renewable energy is essential, as are the jobs that it creates. Before we bring out the candidates for governor, we would like to invite you to a discussion on the intersection of labor and climate. Blue Planet is hosting a virtual event tomorrow. It's August 5th at noon, where an expert panel will dive deep into how we get to 100% clean energy while supporting our economy, keeping workers employed, and bringing up our local people. They will be exploring questions such as how are the health of our economy and our clean energy transition connected? What are the best opportunities to create new jobs while reducing our dependence on fossil fuels? And what are the ways that climate change has already impacted Hawaii's labor industries? Hear from 4 leading experts and thought leaders on the intersection of labor and climate. That will be Jun Shin, a local labor activist; Ikaika Hasi from Hawaii Federated Industries; Paola Rodelas from Jobs to Move America; and Leroy Chincio from IBEW Local 1260. This virtual event, again, will be tomorrow, August 5th at noon. And now back to the forum, where we're ready to welcome our candidates for governor. First, Congressman Kai Kahele. Mr. Kahele is a combat veteran, a pilot, and a commissioned officer in the Hawaii Air National Guard, the U.S. Air Force, where he continues to serve as a lieutenant colonel at Hickam Air Force Base. Now, during his tenure as a state senator, he served as the majority whip and the majority floor leader, as well as the chair of the committees on higher education and water and land. Welcome. Next, Vicky Cayetano. She's an entrepreneur, a mother, and a former first lady. She co-founded United Laundry Services in 1987 and has led the company as president for 34 years. In 2009, Vicky and her husband, you may know him, Ben, started the Cayetano Foundation Scholarship, providing 20 college scholarships to students in financial need every year. Vicky feels a strong obligation to give back and do all she can to improve the lives of the people of our state. Welcome. And Heidi Tsuneyoshi. She currently serves as Honolulu City Council member for District 2. She has been in office since 2019 and has sat on several committees, including the committee chair of Parks and committee chair of Public Safety. Heidi's work experience also includes working in homeless and transitional shelters, and in the women's prison, and with at-risk youth. Welcome to you all. Have a seat. All right, and now to the questions. Scientific consensus in recent reports published by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, or the IPCC, warns that to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions 50% by 2030. As Hawaii's next governor, you could potentially serve in office the entire length of that critical timeline. What are the top 2 actions you would take to rapidly reduce Hawaii's contributions to climate change? And Kai, you can go first.
Well, mahalo for the question, Gina, and mahalo for Blue Planet for hosting this, for having us here. You know, the state is already doing a great job, and through good, solid climate policies, we have a mandate to be reduce our carbon emissions in what generates our power across the state by 2045. And also to be carbon neutral by 2045. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 is also going to put a further mandate to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030. 2 things that we can do is we need to expand whether it's utility grade solar, more residential solar throughout the state. We need to work together with the PUC, we need to work together with the utility to improve and expand residential solar across Hawaii. we're going to run into a problem. And part of that problem is the lack of available land to do that and the competition with housing and important agricultural lands. And so I believe that we need to expand more residential rooftop solar. We should expand rooftop solar and photovoltaic solar throughout parking lots across Hawaii, especially here on Oahu. Right outside Vaivai Collective, we could have solar panels filling this entire parking lot. That's just one example. Otherwise, we're going to compete with housing and important ag lands. Another thing I think the state can do is we can invest in what the previous candidates talked about, sustainable aviation fuels. We can invest in ocean thermal energy conversion with Makai Technologies over at Nelha. We can invest in geothermal energy and geothermal exploration throughout the state. There's geothermal potential here on Hawaii, here on the island of Oahu. We can utilize that to have green energy through hydrogen. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities, Gina, that we can do as a state, and working together with the legislature is going to be critical that we continue to do that.
Thank you. And on this one, since this answers require a lot of details, each of you take about another 30 seconds beyond the time clock that you see to balance that out. All right. Next, Vicki.
Well, I think it's very important that we move from policy to implementation. And as a quarter of our emissions come from transportation, I think we need to take a really hard look about how we're going to implement having our residents convert to electric vehicles. Do we have enough charging stations? The answer is no. How do we get there? Do we have enough electricity to support these charging stations? Condominiums, residents, how do we mandate or not residents to convert from a fuel-powered vehicle, including companies, to electric vehicles? Do we give incentives? So I think we need to start really the details of implementing this, because there are a lot of issues, a lot of questions, and I think we need to work with our communities if we are truly going to move in that direction. And because 24%, 25% of it does come from transportation-related vehicles, we need to really look at this statewide and see how we can implement that, including consideration of tax incentives for people who earn a certain income or less in order to convert from their vehicles to electric vehicles. But if that's truly the goal, then we need to do that heavy lifting now. Thank you.
Thank you. And Heidi.
Thank you so much, Gina. Thank you to Blue Planet Elemental Accelerator, to Director Stanbro, who I had the pleasure of working with at City Council. I'll still call you Director, and Dr. Fletcher, all of you who are here, who have expertise in this area and who have kept the conversation going. As we know, Hawaii is a leader in a lot of what we've done, as far as we are the highest solar producers in the nation as a state. So we have come to a very good place and a very good understanding of the need to move forward. As the council member for District 2, where the issue happened in Kahuku with the wind turbine sited close to our schools and community, as governor, what I think is most important for me is to be able to work with individuals like yourselves and to all the stakeholders to make sure that when we have clean energy projects moving forward, that we do that in a way that the community can welcome and support, as opposed to having such strong opposition in the community. That particular project was approved right before I came into office. So when I got into office, I stepped right into everything that was going on with the Kuku community, and it was a very devastating situation for the community and then for the clean initiative, energy initiatives conversation at large. So as governor, I will work very hard to work with stakeholders like yourselves to make sure that we move forward on projects that the communities can support. One main thing is to diversify our portfolio of our clean energy initiatives. As we know right now, most of it is invested in our solar initiatives, but there's a lot more that we can do that can be a win-win. As we know, we also have H-Power here on Oahu, but we have other initiatives that we can move forward, like on Kauai. They're doing an amazing job of removing invasive albizia trees and using those to create energy, and then planting eucalyptus trees in its place. So that's a win-win type of project that can be done, and we really need to look to initiatives such as that to be able to have win-wins. Also, to increase our tree canopy. As governor, I want to look not only how to decrease emissions, but increase our natural environment in terms of how do we deal with emissions as a whole. And that can definitely be done by planting more trees. That seems like such a simple concept to say. We took that initiative at the City and County of Honolulu, but it's very important to increase our green canopy in the City and County of Honolulu and throughout our state to make sure to create more natural and sustainable environments. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And for the rest of our questions, we'll stick with the minute 30 timing. About a quarter of the state's greenhouse gas emissions come from gasoline and diesel powered cars and trucks. What's more, according to a 2021 report by Ulupono Initiative, Hawaii's vehicle transportation comes with an annual price tag totaling $21.8 billion. So this amounts to more than $46,000 per household. Now that includes state and county expenditures, social and economic trade-offs, and real estate value of all the land we have to set aside for roadways and parking, as well as costs borne directly by consumers in the form of vehicle ownership and costs. And that's all before the recent surging gas prices. How would your administration help local families access more affordable and clean transportation options and make them more convenient and reliable? Vicki.
Well, I think one of the opportunities we do have is to look at public transportation. In particular, working with the county to see how we can transition the bus systems to electric-powered vehicles, and to give, whether it's giving our kupuna, free passes, we need to help offset some of these costs, because as you say, everything is just surging so incredibly fast. We need to help what we can by offsetting that. The other thing I would say is really to look at how we can incentivize people to move from their gas-powered, fossil fuel-powered vehicles, both business and as consumers and residents, into electric vehicles. But this will be a challenge because you have to consider charging stations, you have to consider whether we have enough on the grid to power all of that. So we as a state, as government, tend to be very generous in how we set about policy. The biggest challenge is always in the implementation. But we have to start now, and this is a very big part of, I think, the plan, because it does result in 25% of our emissions. So I would work on a detailed plan to start that heavy lifting with our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Heidi.
The issue of getting individuals out of their cars is a sensitive issue for me, representing much of rural Oahu, and knowing the social justice issues that come with moving everybody into electric vehicles. I'm very sensitive to the topic of just saying that we have to get everybody out of their cars that require fuel. As governor, what I really think is important for us to focus on is increasing our access to public transportation. I think our best option of making behavioral change within our communities is to provide positive options for our residents to utilize, to give them the incentives to get out of their cars and get onto public transportation. Servicing the rural area of Oahu and representing much of the areas that have limited access to public transportation, I know how very critical these conversations are, and we need to have these conversations right away if we do truly wish to move to more public transportation. So as governor, would work with the counties to get more federal money to be able to improve our public transportation systems. As we know, here on Oahu, we have the rail project that was supposed to really help us with this, but that is also having its issues, as we know, and is also powered by electricity. So we need to really look at our buses and potentially buses that are powered electrified fleet to be able to go out to our rural communities and offer options. We also then need to increase our opportunities for bus shelters and different things like that, very common sense things that need to happen to get people onto public transportation, that they don't have to wait out in the weather and feel uncomfortable in utilizing public transportation.
Thank you. And Kai.
So I think we need two strategic plans, just like I think we need two strategic plans for affordable housing. First strategic plan is really from Halawa into town, and it's a dense urban type of public transportation plan. Second plan would be for the rest of the state, including the neighbor islands. Rail is supposed to play a huge part in addressing our public transportation needs. I'm a firm supporter that we need to finish rail to Manoa, we need to add the other 3 miles on, and we need to bring that rail station out into the heart of Kapolei, so hopefully many residents that live on the Leeward Coast can utilize the rail to come into town. I also believe that we need to incentivize individuals that want to purchase electric vehicles, just like Vicki said, to allow them to convert to that. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 is going to provide a $4,000 incentive to people that want to invest in electric vehicles. The state can also set the conditions to do that. We used to have a provision that would allow you to buy an electric vehicle and park for free. at our state's airports and in other places. Well, the legislature repealed that exemption as requested by the State Department of Transportation. I have no idea why we did that. I opposed that when I was in the state legislature. We need to bring that back and bring back incentives so that people want to buy electric vehicles. Finally, buses. We have a great potential. Other states are doing it. California is doing it to convert over to hydrogen buses and utilize electric buses and hydrogen buses. And then, like Keith Amemiya said earlier, let's create pathways throughout that urban, dense transportation corridor so people can have bicycle paths, they can walk to work, they can use public transportation to go to work, and not have to drive a car.
Thank you. Well, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed by Congress provides an arguably once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Hawaii. In the area of renewable energy, the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission is on the record stating that Hawaii should maximize available federal funds versus relying on all of us, local ratepayers. As governor, how will you use your power to convene all stakeholders to best position Hawaii to maximize available dollars in this sector and others? Heidi.
Thank you. That is a huge opportunity for us in our state, and what we really need to do to be competitive is to get ahead and be innovative and come up with ideas that other places can't do. I just referenced a situation where taking out invasive plants, using that to create energy, and planting plants that are more natural to our environment is something that we can definitely do that increases our tree canopy. And so we need to be the leaders, and I think we can be that. Hawaii is such a very special place. We have so many options available. We have geothermal. We have a lot of different options to us that other places don't have, that we really need to show that initiative and get in front of Congress, get in front of the president. As governor, I'll be very interactive with that, going with a group of stakeholders from our beautiful state to show them our initiatives and what we have moving forward. I'm very inspired by our future generation. I'm a mother of two. My daughters are 24 and 22, and they're looking to us and saying there's so much that we can do that we haven't even thought of yet. Looking at renewable natural gas, biomass, and other industries where it can really also create a lot of jobs that our next generation could be a part of. So we can be very innovative, very forward-thinking, and create a lot of opportunities, not just for renewable energy, but for job creation and new technologies that our state so desperately needs. And as governor, I would take the lead on that, but definitely work with individuals like Blue Planet. Energy is spotty here. We need better power to the grid. No. Hello. Definitely work with different collaborative stakeholders such as yourselves and the many that come to the table to be a part of that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go to Kai next.
You know, with all due respect to all the candidates running for governor, and they're all incredible individuals, this is something that separates me from the rest of the pack. The only candidate running for governor that has walked the halls of Congress, helped write the bipartisan infrastructure bill, served on the T&I committee under Chair Pete DeFazio, and knows where the federal dollars exist to bring back home to Hawaii, and who has seen the disconnect between the office of the governor and Washington, D.C. as a member of the congressional delegation. There's two things I would do. The first thing I think is really important is we need to establish a satellite office over the next 4 years in Washington, D.C. We need to have a staff member from the office of the governor there in Washington, D.C. That's important because Hawaii is 6 hours ahead of Washington, behind Washington, D.C. By the time we get up, we're drinking our coffee, it's 2, 3 in the afternoon in D.C., they're getting ready to wind down. The second thing we need to do is establish this tiger team in the office of the governor that will work together with nonprofits, work together with the best grant writing state agency in the state, the University of Hawaii, to source as much federal grants as possible to bring home that money back to Hawaii. I have the relationships in Washington, D.C. I've walked the halls of Congress. I have the federal interagency partnerships in Washington, have connections in the White House, and this value added to the office of the governor is something that none of the other candidates can bring to the office of the governor. And I've seen it firsthand, and those are the changes I would make to bring as much federal resources back to Hawaii over the next 4 years. And Gina, the next governor of Hawaii will be critical in executing the $2.8 billion of infrastructure funds that are coming to Hawaii over the next 4 years. Governor Ige has already started to implement it. The next governor is going to be critical in finishing that process. And I believe I'm the best person to do that job.
Thank you. And Vicki.
I agree with Congressman. That's why we need you there.
Imagine what I'm going to do for Hawaii when I'm their governor.
That's why we need you there. You know, it's an incredibly important position, and I, as governor, I would work very closely with the congressional delegation. I agree that I would create a position to really follow and make sure that we access any grants that are available. I would, however, have that position here, because I believe that that is what our senators and congressmen do for us in Washington, D.C. But we need local, here, a designated, dedicated local person to work with folks like you, Blue Planet, University of Hawaii, to make sure that we access that. I feel that oftentimes the state has really missed the opportunities for funding, and we need to be far more assertive and aggressive in making sure we get our share of it, but beyond that also to make sure that we put in place systems of accountability and transparency so that we can see where our dollars, where our federal funding dollars are going to, so we can see the results. Because so often we talk about these things, we get the money, and then we're all wondering, how come we haven't seen any progress? So I think you gotta have those hand in hand married together to produce the results we desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Hawaii has shown strong leadership in setting bold, long-term goals, but when it comes to the hard policies around near-term implementation, we often create unfunded mandates, or we have trouble finding the political will to make hard decisions now. So, what is one hard or unpopular thing you would advocate for doing now? Kai.
I would stop building a stadium on the Aloha Stadium 98-acre parcel. That is a position I've clearly taken that I believe distinguishes myself from the other candidates. I cannot comprehend why we would start a $500 million stadium project when we can't even finish the rail on the most valuable piece of 98 acres between here and West Oahu. We should be building housing. If housing is the #1 issue in this state, and it is year after year after year, then we should be building housing there. 10,000 homes, mixed use, live, work, play, right on the rail line, right in the town, and then develop that urban dense corridor all the way to Waikiki. We should stop any plans to build a stadium there. We should relook at where we should build it. I would love to have a stadium here on the lower campus, on the practice fields. As a UH men's volleyball student athlete and a member of the Letter Winners Club, I'd love to see a stadium there, but you can't build a 40,000 seat stadium there. The best place we can have a stadium is in West Oahu. That will compel us to finish rail from Ala Moana to the University of Hawaii, so we can put students on the rail to go to the football games out in West Oahu, and we can continue to develop that area. We should not be building a stadium on the Aloha Stadium parcel. We should stop that, and as governor of Hawaii, I will do everything I can to stop that project from being built there.
Thank you. Vicki.
I have to say I agree with Congressman on that issue, but my part would be to address coastal erosion. And I believe that we must have those difficult conversations with the communities that are impacted now. We need to access and look at federal funding because this is a very expensive project. While we don't have exact numbers, we have estimates on what it's going to cost. When you bring people together to talk about moving them out of their homes, questions like who's going to pay for this? Some people are wedded to their homes, and while they have to move, I can understand how hard it is to leave a place that you've called home for so many years. But these are difficult conversations. I think for too long it's been delayed, deferred, kicked down the road. We have to address that now. And for me, that would involve working again with the congressional delegation to look at funding, working with the communities to have those difficult conversations, and working with organizations like the University of Hawaii, subject matter experts. But the governor has to lead with the representatives and senators from each district and the neighborhood boards to start moving into place a plan to address coastal erosion and the homes falling off the cliff, off their area. So we really have to move with urgency on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And Heidi.
As it goes with our bold policy initiatives. Do I have too much electricity in me? No. As it comes to our bold policy initiatives and having very lofty goals, there's so much in our state that we've talked about for a very long time. Our clean energy initiatives is one. Another is affordable housing. Another is diversifying our economy and making sure we shift toward agriculture and food production. There's many, many things that we've known about for a long time, to include dealing with the capacity of the amount of tourists coming to our island state. As governor, one of the main things that I'll be looking at is looking to smart development and sustainable development. At the City Council, we initiate and we draft sustainable community plans, which looks at each community and sees if that community has what it needs to be resilient and sustainable in the case of any natural disaster, or if anything happens. We haven't moved forward boldly on those types of initiatives, and as governor, we'll work for smart sustainable development, which could include a moratorium on hotel buildings, as was initiated by Maui County. They proposed a moratorium on building any new hotels. I would support legislation like that. As we know, our hotels take up a lot of our needed resources, our electric, our water, our sewer capacity, as well as taking up a lot of our space, just our space, our land necessary for our people. I flew into California recently and was very saddened to see, looking over and coming down for a landing, so much brown because of the drought, everything brown. And then you see the green, and you realize the green is the golf courses. And that's completely unacceptable to me. As governor, our resources cannot go to hotels and golf courses. It needs to go to agriculture and our homes. So as governor, we'll focus our energies on smart, sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, finally, as governor, how would you support and develop Hawaii's position as a national leader in clean energy and climate change mitigation and adaptation? Vicki.
Well, I think there are multiple things that we need to do. One is, while we have the affordable renewable energy plan that's in place and are making progress, I think the heavy lifting is coming towards the end of that, and I think we need to address that now. As I mentioned, coastal erosion. The other thing I think we need to start doing as a state that is so overly dependent on tourists, we need to start holding our tourism industry more accountable in how they use our natural resources. And what I mean specifically is, as governor, I would work with HTA and the hotel industry to put in place mechanisms to hold the hotels accountable for the amount of utility and water that is being used. It isn't to say that we're putting quotas on them, but I think we need to absolutely manage and have them as a partner with 8-9 million visitors every year coming in, you know, and to have no accountability of how they're using our natural resources is just, to me, unacceptable. So that's one of the things I would do, is start having those conversations to have them work on a system where they can manage the water and the energy usage that each hotel, each building that they manage generates for the visitors. At least we need to start someplace, and that's what I would do. Thank you.
Thank you. And next to Heidi.
Thank you. As governor, I do believe that we can be the place the world looks to see what is sustainable. How did we adapt? How did we move ourselves from a place of crisis to a place of moving forward in growth and resiliency? How do I know we can do that? Because our history tells us it was so. When we look to our ali'i and how our land was managed with the Ahupua'a system, we were one of the most resilient places on the planet. We had enough food for everybody that lived here, and those numbers were much to the numbers of what we have here now. As governor, I would look to implement something along those lines, a Ahupua'a system, where we look to each community and make sure they have all the things that they need to be self-sustaining and to be safe and secure in the issues, especially in emergency situations. As mentioned, I do represent rural Oahu. Director Stanbro, you were amazing. Dr. Fletcher worked with us a lot too on how to create resiliency in our rural communities, and I think we really need to work on that in all our communities, our neighbor islands definitely for sure as well, so we can show adaptation, we can show resiliency, and we can show how we do all these things as a people. That one thing that we have above of anybody else is, I feel, when you have a strong connection to this place, to our people and our land, and that connection to the future, we come together like no other. We come together and we strive and we try to make sure we move in the best way possible like no other. So as governor, I'd be happy and very humbled to lead that charge with all of you who are ready to see a brighter future for our people and for our land, and I believe we can do that 100%. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kai.
You know, I really believe that this state has a unique opportunity that doesn't come along very often to embrace a new generation of OEV leadership. I really believe that indigenous wisdom can solve many of the problems that this state faces today. You know, Heidi mentioned it. Native Hawaiians and the Hawaiian community have been in these islands for 1,000 years. We knew how to live sustainably. We fed an entire population of people. We had Mauka to Makai stream flow. Our waters allowed our communities to thrive. This is what we need to go back to. We need to go back to a community and an island state that can serve as an example and a beacon for the rest of the world. There's unique opportunities we can utilize here in the state government to allow more clean energy, green energy, more hydropower, you know, opportunities to feed the grid to reduce our energy costs and do it in a way that is mindful of our communities, mindful of the special places that we have, especially our rural communities. And I believe if we do that, we can take this state on an entirely new sail plan. We can inspire people all over the Pai'aina who want to be involved in government, that maybe don't feel like there's a role for them in government, but can look to the next generation of leaders to do that. And that's the opportunity that we have in this election. And I think it's a clear choice between the candidates that the people of Hawaii have an opportunity to choose to lead them.
Thank you. And thank you, candidates. That concludes today's forum. Mahalo to all of you for joining us and all of you for watching. The ballots that you have received in the mail are due back by the end of the election period, which is Saturday, August 13th. If you're submitting your ballot by mail, send it out about 5 days prior to the 13th, or you can drop it off at your ballot at a voter service center or a drop box near you. Well, stay with KHON2 News for all of your election coverage and results at the end of the night on the 13th. And thank you to Blue Planet Foundation and to Elemental Accelerator for sponsoring this event. And to all of you watching, aloha.